All right, this is Mr. McMurray, and we're going to start talking about proteins. Proteins, we said, are polymers that contain nitrogen, and they're made of units that are called amino acids. This is an amino acid group. The amine group is right here, not a nice group, but amine group, and that is one nitrogen and two hydrogens. This over here is the acid group, organic acid, has double bond OOH, COOH, it's also called. So that's an amine and an acid group makes an amino acid. Now, the R part here is where you can attach other things onto it if you would like. And here's the same thing, amine group, acid group, and here's the R that you can attach things to. Here they've attached a carbon with two hydrogens and a acid group, C double bond O and OH, kind of like down here, just written a little different. And so this is an acidic amino acid called aspartic acid. And there's about 23 to 26 of these different amino acids that are used to build all the proteins in our body. Now, those amino acids have to be strung together like pop beads on a necklace in a long chain. And if they're not in the right order, then they will mess up because this has to fold, and when it bends up, I'm going to show you like accordion here, certain bonds here are going to match up. And then those have to bend again, and more bonds make another shape. And finally, a fourth folding gives it a very specific shape. Okay, proteins are very important about being the right shape. If they're not the right shape, they will not work. If they will not work, then whatever the protein is used for is going to start causing problems because it's not going to work properly. And so proteins are also very susceptible to being denatured. Denatured meaning that they heat, cold, shaking up, various things can disrupt their structure. And if it messes up their structure, then they no longer work. Egg whites are made out of protein. If you cook them, they turn white. Well, what's happening is we're denaturing the protein, we're breaking it up, and that's why you cannot hatch a chicken out of an egg once it's been fried, among other reasons, but because all the proteins have been irrevocably changed and denatured. All right. Now, the other reason, though, besides being structure and all your body is built out of proteins, is that they are enzymes. Enzymes, or they can be called catalysts. Okay. Enzymes are chemicals that control the chemical reactions when they take place and how fast they take place. Okay, which ones take place and how fast. And so they're very important in our body because they make things speed up. Otherwise, a lot of the reactions in our body wouldn't happen fast enough to keep us alive. Okay, and so these help speed it up when we need it and turn it off when we don't. All right, if it's in your body, we call it an enzyme. If it's in a laboratory, we would call it a catalyst, but they do the same thing. They speed up the reactions. Now, when they have, for example, say you have two chemicals and they're floating around in a beaker of water. The odds of those two ever bumping into are very small, relatively small. And if they do bump into each other, they might not be oriented the right way to where they can react with each other and form a reaction. Just like if you had two people in New York City trying to find each other, well, the odds of them just randomly bumping into each other and then happen to bump into each other in a situation that might lend itself for them to get to know each other and become interested in each other is not very good. Okay, and so basically the protein acts as a matchmaker. It has a particular shape. These shapes fit these two chemicals. When it sees these chemicals, it grabs them, puts them there. It puts them next to each other, lined up, so that they will react with each other and form bonds and make a new chemical. So it's kind of like a matchmaker. They're taking them, such as them randomly running into each other at Walmart or somewhere where it might not be very conducive to romance. They're going to take the chemicals on a nice date or maybe just a movie and let them get to know each other and put them in the right situation so that they can, boom, bond just like that. Okay, then they let that go, and then they're ready to go do that again because they are not used up by the reaction. They're kind of like friends you might have that start the fight, but then they step back and everybody else fight and tear each other up. That's kind of what enzymes do. They cause the reaction, but they do not take part in it. Okay, and so they are still there and can still keep doing their job. Now, whatever the reaction is going on in our body, we don't want it to go on forever, so eventually they're going to have to be activated to make the reaction start or deactivated to make the reaction slow down. We'll talk about that in a second. Okay, but their names usually end in ASE. Remember, OSE was like sugars, like lactose is the sugar in milk. Lactase is the chemical that breaks down or digests that. Some people do not have that enzyme, so they're lactose intolerant. They either have to stay away from milk or it'll give them indigestion, upset stomach, diarrhea, whatever other things. But they can also take lactate, which is a tablet which has the lactase enzyme in it, and once they take that, then they can drink the milk because the lactase enzyme will help break down the milk. All right, and as we said, they have to be activated, turned on to start functioning, and they're deactivated when they're done functioning. Okay, so your cells can use these to start and finish different reactions in the body. All right, and all proteins, whether they're structural or enzymes, whatever, have 4 calories per gram, which you will remember is the same as that's right, carbohydrate. So carbohydrates and proteins both have 4 calories, whereas lipids have over twice as much, which is 9. All right. All right. Now, the last group we're going to talk about, we got carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins, is nucleic acids. If I just said nucleic acids, people look at you with a blank face and say, what the heck is a nucleic acid? I've never heard of one of those. But if you look at the abbreviation NA, you'll notice DNA and RNA, which everybody's heard of, are in fact nucleic acids. In fact, the name is deoxyribonucleic acid. RNA is ribonucleic acid. When you break it down like that, it's not that hard. Nucleic acid, duh, okay? And notice the first part, the letter in the name, has to do with the sugar. Deoxyribose sugar in DNA, ribose sugar in RNA. They just drop the SE on the end and stick it on there, and that tells you what kind of nucleic acid we have. Now, they are also polymers. They're made of long chains, but they're made out of monomers or single units called nucleotides. Not to be confused with high tide, low tide, Tide detergent, or any other Tide. These are inside the cell. All right, inside the nucleus. And so you hook these nucleotides together to make the polymers, nucleic acid, DNA, and RNA. Now, you probably recognize this picture. For example, here's a nitrogen base. These are the things coming across. They are attached to that white part there, which represents a sugar, either deoxyribose or ribose. This is DNA, so it would be deoxyribose. And then there's a group called a phosphate group here. And you have another sugar and a nitrogen base, phosphate, another sugar, a nitrogen base, and so on and so on, okay? And so that's the repeating pattern. Notice the bases are all different, but the pattern is the same. Sugar and a base, phosphate, sugar and a base, phosphate, sugar and base, and the same thing on this side. Now, I've straightened this one out. This would be like RNA. RNA is just one strand. DNA is 2 strands. But you need to draw 1 or 2 of these here, maybe 3 and 4. Each of these is a nucleotide, all right? So let me click on this one real quick. All right, so right there would be 1 nucleotide, okay? You've got a phosphate group, you've got a sugar, and you've got a nitrogen base, okay? So that's 1. Right here would be another 1 because you've got a nitrogen base, a sugar, and a phosphate group. And the sugar on this one attaches to the phosphate on that one, and so on and so on. And before long, you have a long string of maybe hundreds or thousands and maybe even millions of these. All right, so that's basically what they're made out of. All right, now, go back to my clicker. You don't have to draw this, and you don't have to know this, but chemically speaking, whoops, let me do that again, I'm sorry. Okay, chemically speaking, this is the same thing. Here's a P with 4 oxygens around it. Guess what? That's a phosphate group. Here's, instead of a 6 carbon sugar, deoxyribose only has 6 sugars, but carbons, but one of them's over here. All right, so it's got this pentagon shape. That's deoxyribose, or yeah, the sugar. This has N's on it. All right, so we know that's going to be a nitrogen something, so that is a nitrogen base. Notice on the other side you have a phosphate, a sugar, and a nitrogen base. Okay, and then these two pair up. All right, then phosphate, sugar, nitrogen base, phosphate, sugar, nitrogen base. Same pattern over and over. Okay, you won't, like that. I won't have on a test. I'm not going to have you identify them on the drawing here, but that's basically the same thing that we've drawn over here. It's just a lot easier to draw it this way than to draw the actual chemicals out. All right, what does DNA do? Why do we have it? Well, number one, one of the things it has to do is it has to make a copy of itself. If you're going to divide and make 2 cells, well, the cell has a copy of DNA, but it needs to make a copy of itself so that you have 2 copies for the two new cells. Once the cell divides, there's going to be two cells, so you're going to need two copies of it. All right. It also contains the instructions or code for building every protein in the body. Okay, so the DNA includes the instructions for building all the proteins in your body. All right. Now, if it does that, what happens if something happens to the instructions? The cell dies. Okay, so basically, it's very important to protect the DNA. All right. If it's damaged by radiation or something like that, then it can mutate and other bad things can happen. All right. Does every cell have all the instructions for the whole body? Correct answer is yes, it does. Okay, and so every cell has all the instructions for the whole body, but it only reads a little section of it that it has, but the actual instructions are there. All right. Okay. Now, since if the DNA gets destroyed and something happens to it, then it's going to kill the cell. Instead of letting the cell use the original DNA to make proteins, we send a copy of RNA out. We take a copy of RNA, it goes out in the cell, tells it how to build the protein. If something happens to the RNA, then we can just make a new copy of it from the DNA. But we keep the DNA safe in the nucleus, so nothing happens to it. All right. Differences between DNA and RNA. Real quickly, DNA, we said, has one strand. DNA has two. It also has a spiral or double helix. DNA has deoxyribose sugar, whereas RNA just has the ribose sugar, so they have a different sugar. But everybody is sweet at their DNA because it's all made out of sugar. And in DNA, there are 4 nitrogen bases. Cytosine, or C, which pairs with G, and adenine, or A, which pairs with T. All right. In RNA, A pairs with U, or uracil. All right. Like uracil. No, uracil. Your mom is a cell. No, okay, sorry, got sidetracked there. All right. A pairs with U. C also pairs with G. That's the same in DNA. That's also the same down here in RNA. But instead of a T, RNA has a U. And that's it for the notes.